What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekoArt video. In this one, I'm going to be assembling what might just be the best looking system I've put together this year. With a white height Y40, a Founders Edition 4080, and loads of other sick hardware, this is a build you don't want to miss. Let's do this. Corsair Xeneon 32-inch gaming monitor is a panel that packs a punch, bringing your games and media to life on a vibrant, ultra-slim 32-inch IPS 4K display. It's a panel with some power. What's more, the fast 144Hz refresh rate and nippy 1 millisecond response time ensure you can keep a competitive edge. Learn more about the Xeneon 32 UHD 144 at the first links in the description below, and buy now on the Corsair web store. I'm going to start things off as usual with a quick rundown of the parts I selected and why, before assembling the build and testing out performance at the end. Now, the build will be assembled inside the Hype Y40. It's one of my favourite PC cases on the market right now, and basically takes the Y60 and makes it a little bit smaller. The Y60 is a more versatile case than this one, but the larger size does make it a more difficult fit to your gaming setup. I personally rock the Y60 and love it, but the Y40 would be ideal if I had a smaller desk at my home office. Fan and radiator mounting support is fantastic, and support for next-gen GPUs, like what we've picked here today, is top tier. Talking of which, I've gone ahead and selected the RTX 4080. Now, the GPU market almost looked like it was back to normal, and now it's going the other way, which is bad news. If you look at the current state of affairs, 4090s are basically impossible to buy. AMD 7900 XTXs have been in stock hardly ever, if at all, since they first launched, making cards like the 4080 one of the only available options on the market right now. Unfortunately, if anything, this shows consumers are more than happy to pay the inflated prices on the new cards from both AMD and Nvidia, though of course Nvidia are the slightly worse offenders. Nevertheless, if you are considering this card, the bonuses are top tier 4K gaming. It doesn't give you quite as good numbers as a 4090, but for a lot less money, it's a great second bet, and with plenty of VRAM, a large triple slot cooling form factor, it's a bit of a monster. This build actually has 4 PCI slots on the back, meaning we could fit even the largest 4080 and 4090s in if we so wanted. Picking an older case in the current climate might actually be a worse idea than it has been previously, due to, of course, these new chassis providing much better support for new GPUs. Despite this being a small case, it still supports full-size ATX motherboards, which is where the Asus Prime Z790A Wi-Fi comes in. Unlike the last generation Z690 Prime Wi-Fi, this one's more substantial with better VRM power delivery, better overclocking, but still a pretty good price really for Z790 motherboards. Although this is a powerful build, we haven't got to spend another $300 on a board, as frankly, minus the overclocking, it won't give us any more performance. The CPU I've selected is Intel's Core i7 13700K. The i7 is a great bet for those who want top tier gaming performance without the money you'd have to spend to buy an i9. With 16 cores, 24 threads, and a boost clock speed of well over 5 GHz, it's still a very capable chip, and makes this i7 the best i7 I've ever seen by a long way. And of course, I don't just mean that in terms of raw performance levels, but its makeup really punches above its weight in terms of core, thread count, and clock speeds. Cooling will be provided by the Master Liquid PL240 Flux, a gorgeous white cooler that we can actually mount on the side of the case. This will make it a little bit more visible and viewable. That way, the 3 fan spots at the top are available for the addition of more airflow. This one's a really nice option, but Corsair also have some great 240mm units, as do the likes of NZXT and even Thermaltake if you're looking for alternative choices. In terms of RAM or memory, 32 gigs of Corsair's Vengeance RGB Pro DDR5 is the order of the day. DDR5 was really expensive a year ago, but prices have fallen so much, and even DDR4 now is the cheapest it's ever been. So although areas like the GPU and the motherboard are slightly more expensive than a couple of years ago, it is compensating in the memory and also the SSD department. This is Corsair's MP600GS. This particular drive is 2 TB, but a 1 TB would also work fine. This is is not quite top of the range Gen 4 speeds, but saves us some money. Still get 5 gigabytes per second up to on the read, slightly slower on the write, 4.5 gigs, so plenty of fast performance for speedy Windows boot up times. Otherwise though, we're nearly there on the parts front. Power, I've opted for Corsair's RM850. It's one of the better 850 watt units on the market and can power up nice and easily the 4080 in this build. Plus, I've also gone ahead and picked up Corsair's Gen 5 PCI power cable to reduce cable clutter and keep the whole build looking nice and clean. Otherwise though, parts are covered off. They'll be linked as always at the affiliate links for Amazon down below, but it's time to build this system. Started off, of course, by installing the CPU into the motherboard. I actually really dig the design on Asus's latest Z790 boards. There's some great designs in the stack, and this Prime is no exception to that rule. Remove the socket cover, add the ARM into place, and then I can also just pop the RAM or memory in. This will be installed into the grey slots on this motherboard. Typically, it's the second and fourth, or slots 1 and 3, as they actually start counting from 0, believe it or not. As I make a mess of trying to get into this kit of RAM. Come on, out we go. Gonna suit the colour scheme perfectly in white. All you need to do is push the clips back, line up the little notch on the golden strip, and slide the RAM into place. Bit of pressure with 2 thumbs on either side, and that will ensure the whole thing goes in nice and easily. Then you just got to repeat that for as many DIMMs as you've got, 2 in our case, making the whole thing nice and simple. SSD slots next. Need to remove this slot before adding in the MP600GS and securing the whole slot back down. This actual heatsink here will keep the drive a bit cooler as well, providing some passive heat dissipation, which is always good, as the latest NVMe drives can run hot. Before I move over the motherboard to the case, I am going to add in this back plate just to the rear here, and also fasten into place these metal male-to-male screws, stoppers, whatever you want to call them. This is going to provide the basis for the CPU cooler installation in a few moments. And doing this now, before looking at the case, is going to make life that little bit easier, especially as it can be quite fiddly, and having it out in the open makes everything a bit more simple to access. The motherboard then just slides in nice and easily. You just got to pull back out of the way the PCIe riser. We'll be using that in a moment for the vertical GPU mount, and slide the motherboard into place. Oh yes, look at that. Lines it up. Oh, beautiful. One of the standoffs, the one in the middle, is actually slightly raised, so that holds the motherboard in, at least for now. Add all the screws in, pop the riser cable in, screw that down, and we're good to go with the next steps on the build. But so far, colour scheme wise, looking pretty good. Cooling is next up, and this is the bit where I need to think carefully about how I want to mount Cooler Master's PL240 Flux. I mentioned earlier I want to pop it on the side here, so I just need to figure out where our tubes are going to go for the radiators. So I'm thinking top mounted tubes? Yeah, it's going to have to be top mounted tubes. Now, thinking about airflow, how do I want to play this? I'm thinking we bring air in from the bottom as intake and pull it out the top and out the side. Potentially as well, what you could also do, but this is a bit of an unorthodox method, is bring air in from the bottom and in from the top and exhaust out the rear. So the fans are going to just sit on the front of the radiator, be installed outside the case before the completed unit moves over afterwards. These white fans also match perfectly with the chassis and can be synced up with any of the other lighting through the Aura Sync module on the motherboard. So some nice cohesive system effects will be waiting for us. The water block is next up. A bit of thermal paste goes onto the CPU and the water block sits straight on top. Add these 4 screws in to fasten it all down and run the cables out the way. I'll be dealing with these a little bit later, wiring the whole thing up at the end. The GPU is the next on my hit list, and you can see that the 4080 Founders Edition is looking pretty good. Of course, as well, in this case, it should fit without too many problems. I'm going to use 2 hands to drag the case this way. Nice. I'm going to hover it over the vertical GPU mount, and you can see what I mean. We've still got plenty of airflow room at the front. I'm going to remove the back 3 lanes, as this is a triple slot graphics card, and ensure that the PCIe cable itself has the clip pushed down to ensure smooth installation of the graphics card. In it goes. Line it up over the slot. You might have to get your head in there just to give it a closer look. Yes. Bit of pressure, and it clicks into place nice and easy. Couple of screws will stop it from wobbling, but otherwise, that's looking really good. Got extra clearance on the side here as well to allow for plenty of airflow, and of course, a bigger card if you wanted to sub something a little bit larger into place. Power is going to be provided in the next stage of the build, where the Corsair, here it is, RM850 comes into play. This power supply is also fully modular, meaning you only need to plug in the cables you actually want to use, but make sure you keep the spare ones safe and to one side, as if you add in more hardware or make any upgrades, changes, that kind of thing later on, you'll want those extra cables to be able to do so. As far as cables go, there are a few to plug in. So we've got a motherboard power cable, which is the largest, a couple of CPU power connections, which are comprised of 8 pins, SATA power for all of our peripherals and RGB controllers, as well as our PCIe Gen 5 power connector for the graphics card. Add all these in, screw the power supply into place, and then it's finally time time to boot this machine up. I'm super stoked to see how good this thing looks when it's all powered up, and with a couple more fans at the top too for good measure, the airflow, aesthetics and RGB should be taken up a notch. Let's do this. Taking a look then at the performance, and I've put this build through its paces in a wide range of titles, predominantly testing at 4K, as that's where the RTX 4080 most excels. If you're only looking to game at 1440p, the 4080 is an overkill bet where you could probably save money going elsewhere. Looking at Warzone 2 first of all at 4K, high settings with DLSS enabled and set to quality, pulled in a strong 115 frames per second on average. The game performed pretty well. Of course, if you did drop to 1440p, you would get those more competitive settings, but to be honest, the better way would be to tune DLSS down to performance and maybe game at 4K medium to achieve that more important 150-160 FPS mark. Things improved slightly in COD Modern Warfare 2, 4K high DLSS quality once again yielded 122 FPS. Very similar to Warzone 2, pretty predictable, with a few more frames per second here and there. Fortnite next at 1080p competitive settings worked well. We did test this at 1080p competitive, as it's something we always do when looking at Fortnite. 224 frames per second was the frame rate of the day, with consistent 90 and 99th percentile results that made for a competitive gaming experience. Back testing at 4K next in Apex Legends, and once again we also witnessed some pretty strong results. 4K high in this first-person shooter Battle Royale title yielded 155 frames per second on average. Other games also worked well on this system. Overwatch 2 next at 4K Ultra gave us a strong 175 frames per second on average. Very competitive at that top resolution 4K, while titles like Battlefield 2042 also stacked up well. 4K high, DLSS on performance, and 131 FPS was very achievable. This is a strong build that's perfect for 4K gaming and even a bit of video editing, live streaming and productivity-based applications. You can find links to all the parts down below. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.